My name is Ignacia, and welcome to my book channel. I feel so funny doing this because I've wanted to create a book channel for a while, the beginning of quarantine, and then I just never did it. So here I am. It's the start of a new month. It's my birthday month. Not that that has anything to do with the timing, but it just so happens to be my birthday month, and I just thought I would do it. So welcome. Obviously, my hope is to talk about the books that I'm reading and share with all of you viewers. And yeah, so because it's the start of a new month, I thought I would go through the books I read this month and just share and talk a little bit about them. So this is my little stack. I didn't read that much, or I feel like I did, but it's only because one of the books that I read was a real thick one that I'm not used to reading super long thick books, but yeah, so this is my stack for the month. I guess my what I'm like I gravitate towards is usually like contemporary fiction, but I also like to read theory books around like gender, race, or any sort of theory relating to that I'm really into. But that's pretty much all the nonfiction stuff I read. And yeah, so I guess that's a little preamble to what kind of books you might expect to see that I review and whatnot. So yes, all right, so I think I'm gonna go in order of how I read all these books during the month. So I started off, this is actually, I started this at the end of January and then I finished it at the beginning of February, but it's Wolf Hall. And this is a three-parter, a trilogy, and it's historical fiction, and it was really interesting. I honestly really enjoyed it. I hadn't read this genre since I was in high school. I used to read a lot of the Philippa Gregory historical fiction novels, but after that, I'd kind of stopped reading this genre. So this was a really good read. I'd heard a few people on the booktube community actually talk about this, and I saw that my dad had it and I stole it and I'm not giving it back. So it chronicles the beginning stages of Thomas Cromwell's career in Tudor England. And I really like novels that take you through like someone's life essentially, and you kind of start the beginning of the book at the beginning of their life, obviously, and then move it along. So I just found it really interesting. I got really wrapped up in the story, and it was interesting too because a lot of the books that I've read, and granted, it hasn't been very many, but some of the books that I've read that have to do with Tudor England, they focus on like the ditzy details, like, or not even details, but just like the settings are like in parties and ball gowns, and it's just a more romanticized depiction of this time period, whereas I found that this book, all the conversations were taking place in like chambers or in actual meetings between important figures. So I found it a much more like realistic depiction, or not even realistic, because I'm not saying that like there wasn't glitz and glamour during this time period, but I just liked the way that the author kind of took a different stance than what I'm used to seeing. So I really enjoyed this. I am definitely going to pick up the second one and the third one. I think the second one is Bring Up the Bodies, and I think it takes off. Oh, I guess part of this novel, I think the second book has to do with, so Thomas Cromwell is the right hand of Henry VIII, and he's the one that orchestrates his separation from Catherine and his an annulment of that marriage, and then him marrying Anne Boleyn. And he's kind of the mastermind behind that. So this book ends with that coming to fruition. So I'm assuming that the second book, Bring Up the Bodies, will probably deal with Anne Boleyn and her death and probably things along that nature. So I'm excited. I just didn't want to read it back to back because she's a thick girl, and I'm pretty sure that Bring Up the Bodies is equally as thick. So figured I'd go for something a little slimmer. But this was a great reintroduction into the genre, and I really enjoyed it. So I highly recommend. And I'm pretty sure that this, it won the Man Booker Prize, and she did also win the Man Booker, I believe, for Bring Up the Bodies the next, no, I don't think this came in 2 consecutive years, but I do know that the other book also won the Man Booker. So anyways, highly recommend. I really enjoyed it. You don't have to know necessarily like all of the figures in this novel. I thought it was very helpful, and to be honest, I did flip back to the initial pages because it gives you a rundown of all the characters, so you, in case you lose track, which I did. I was no history major, so I just found that really helpful because, you know, these things can get a little complicated, but yeah, loved it. So the next book I read was a complete departure from what I just mentioned. This book came recommended to me by a friend. Hi, Greta. Shout out. And it's nonfiction, and it's a conversation between Noam Chomsky and another important leading figure, and it's called On Palestine. It's a nonfiction, obviously, and it was super informative, and to be quite honest, I was a little ignorant when it came to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and just the complexities in that. So I found this to be a great kind of introductory text for me. It's very digestible, and I believe that Noam Chomsky has other books that are equally as thin in length, but they're kind of like really pack a punch, and it's great if you kind of want to immerse yourself in a certain discussion or topic that you're unfamiliar with. They make it, or he, and this book is no exception, they make the information really digestible, and it's easy to follow, and it just, yeah, I highly recommend this if you want to educate yourself a little bit more and you kind of want to see it through a different lens that maybe you didn't see prior, or you just want to educate yourself. So I highly recommend this guy. Again, super short read. I read it in like a day and a half, but very informative. I learned a lot, and it was a great conversation starter. So yeah, recommend this guy. So then switching gears back to fiction, I read this novel by Raven Leilani, and this is her debut novel called Luster, which this was super hyped on BookTube, and it's the reason why I picked it up. And also, I work at a bookstore, and we got a huge delivery of this guy, so I was pretty excited to read it. I thought I was gonna love it, and I didn't. I feel like my review of this book may be a little unpopular amongst many of you, and just, you know, what people thought in general, but to be honest, so the writing I thought was beautiful, so lyrical, just gorgeous prose, but I found the story itself was quite unbelievable. Like, I don't think I'm spoiling anything by saying this, but just things like she sneaks into the house of the guy that she's seeing, and she just walks into the house, and I think she assumed that there was going to be nobody there, but the man's wife ends up being in the house, and then rather than them have like some altercation or whatever, she actually invites her to stay. So there's certain plot lines or plot development that just felt really unbelievable to me. I couldn't really understand why certain things were happening. Like, the story itself didn't make sense to me. The character, Edie, I thought was really interesting to read. But yeah, just the story itself, which I guess there wasn't really even any story, which is another kind of disappointing bit. And I also thought that a lot of dialogue between the characters was missing, and I feel like it could have been a deeper like connection, or you could get a sense of relatability and believe the story a lot more had we seen more dialogue between the characters, because I felt like a lot of this book was just written obviously in the perspective of the main gal, Edie here. But I just feel like it was all an internal process, and I wish that there would have been more dialogue between her and the man, and her and the man's wife, as well as just between the wife and the husband. I feel like that was really lacking in this book, and so I felt like there were these big gaping holes of like, okay, but she's going through these experiences, but like, how is that coming across to other people in the book? And yeah, I mean, it does talk about issues of gender, class, race, privilege in a really interesting way. Like, it's definitely a thought-provoking book. I just think it fell short for me because I think I was expecting a lot more and to get more deeply immersed and be in the story a lot more than I was. But I also realized I literally didn't even say what this book was about, so forgive me for that. So it has to do with this Black gal living in New York, and she enters into this open relationship with a much older, she's 23, and the man I think is in his 40s. So, and he's married, he's like quite an established white man, just plain Jane. Also, he just wasn't very likable, and I didn't really understand why somebody like her would even be drawn to somebody so fucking bland. Like, I just thought that the man himself was just like so uninteresting and unlikable that I just wondered what the appeal was. Somebody like as like interesting and complex, and yeah, like how somebody like Edie would even be drawn to this man in the first place, or even like engage in that relationship. But anyways, that's beside the point. So she enters into this open marriage, or she ends up having a relationship with a man in an open marriage, and through sequence of events, she ends up moving in with him, his wife, and their adoptive Black child. And so the majority of the book is just the relationship, or the things that happen while Edie is living in their house in New Jersey. So that's the main kind of plot. Another thing too that just didn't make any sense to me, that I feel like the author could have spent a little bit more time convincing us of like why this relationship was even worth pursuing, because it's literally like they go on one date, and the author tells us a little bit about their like text correspondence, and then she has this like super intense like connection to him, but it felt like the author didn't really set that up for us to the point where I like believed it, if that makes sense. Especially because, like I said, he just doesn't have like the most like interesting or redeemable qualities that I would understand like why somebody in their 20s would be like interested in that. I feel like there's somebody more interesting that Edie could have gone for, but that's my biased opinion, obviously. Anyways, I would still recommend it. It just, for me, it just didn't live up to the hype, and I was super excited to read this and thought it was going to be absolutely fabulous, and it just wasn't for me. Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, and then the last book I read was a book of short stories, which I also love to read short stories. And it's Brian Washington's, I believe this is his first book, called Lot. And it takes place in a neighborhood in Houston, and it's several short stories, and we are introduced to different characters, but there's one particular storyline, or one particular family, I should say, whose story is weaved into the entirety of the book. Kind of like weaved into the other isolated stories. So I really enjoyed it because it almost gives you little snippets of one particular family dynamic, and it focuses on Nicolas. He's the main kind of protagonist in this specific story, but at the you're introduced to them at the very beginning, and then we get several other stories of Nicolas and his family throughout the book, and I just really loved it. And it kind of closes again. The last story in this book has to do with Nicolas and his family, and I loved it. I really enjoyed this book. It's a book of short stories that centers in a neighborhood in Houston, and it talks about immigrant experience and issues around race and your sexual identity, your queer, Latino or Latinx identity. And I thought it was beautifully done. I loved the stories. Really raw, really real. It deals with a lot of things that I think are left out of certain immigrant stories when it comes to the complexities of your sexuality in a very conservative, marimacho, Latinx experience. So yeah, loved this book. I highly recommend. Again, really easy read, and as in not long. The stories are not like easy breezy like summer reads, but yeah, I highly recommend this book. I loved it. I'm really glad I picked it up, and I'm a sucker for short stories. So yeah, those are all the books that I read. I think my favorite would have to be Wolf Hall on Palestine. I deeply enjoyed it. It was just, like I said, super interesting. It was really valuable lens in which to see the situation, the present situation, as well as just giving you historical context for this new way of framing the issue, or not new, but just the way that they frame the issue. And yeah, ending my month off with Lot was also great because I love short stories. I love reading about Latinx folk. So yeah, it was a good reading month. I was happy with what I read. I'm glad I kind of switched things up and read some things that I don't usually read. That's always a good thing. And I'm rambling now, so I'm gonna end it here. And yeah, I will hopefully be making more videos in the future. If you, viewer, have any books that you've read lately that you think I might enjoy, you can leave a comment. And with that, I bid you goodbye. See ya.